William, thanks very much for joining us this evening. What are the arguments, in essence, that both the U.S. and Israel are advancing for their position?
Well, essentially the message from the United States, and we heard from the US ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, who described this really seen as an annual opportunity to poke the United States in the eye. Nikki Haley, however, says that the US is completely unperturbed by their embargo that remains in effect on Cuba. The reason for that Nikki Haley said is that this is very much a sign that the United States, or rather, won't stand by and allow what they describe as flagrant human rights abuses to continue in the country. That was why the United States took this year's opportunity as a chance to add 8 amendments to this draft resolution that was put forward by Cuba. Now, those were all shot down on an individual basis, vote by vote. The international community went ahead and vehemently rejected those amendments from the United States. Just 3 nations, Israel, the United States and Ukraine, voted in favour of those amendments. So widely shot down, as was, of course, very much reflected in the ultimate vote on this resolution put forward by Cuba. Of course, the lesson coming in, the message from the European bloc, for example, about why they rejected these amendments from the US is because they see the vote by Cuba as really seen as an issue to discuss the economic blockade that is on Cuba, not an opportunity, not the platform to discuss the alleged human rights abuses in the country in general.
But is that what, in essence, is their issue? Because, I mean, they may well think, it's an opportunity or an annual ritual, if you like, to poke the United States. But what are they saying Cuba is guilty of or continues to do? Or what is it that they want to be stopped for a normalization of relations?
Well, essentially the message from the United States is that this kind of annual vote doesn't save a single child in the country. It doesn't save a single political prisoner or someone that speaks out against what the US see as a clampdown on really civil rights or human rights in the country. So the message from the United States is this embargo will remain in effect as long as they see these abuses as continuing in the country. That's the message from Nikki Haley. She came out and said that in the views of the Trump administration in 2014, when we started to see this normalization in terms of relationship, this thawing of relationship between the US and Cuba under then, of course, President Barack Obama, according to Nikki Haley, she saw there was an increase of abuses in Cuba, not the reverse effect, of course. That's the argument from those nations that voted in favour of this Cuban resolution. They believe that an improvement when it came to economic ties would ultimately lead to an improving situation for all Cuban residents. Of course, the clear message from the United States is that they certainly don't see it that way.
But what have been, the comments of those obviously who don't go with the United States and Israel on this? Have they spoken or do they speak at all about the human rights abuses, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and the likes?
Absolutely. Now, this is something that's really taken the best part of 2 days here in New York. There were speeches throughout the day. On Wednesday here in New York, the vote was then delayed and pushed back into Thursday as nations from around the world had the opportunity to address the United Nations General Assembly. And a clear message is that while some nations do express some certain concerns about these allegations of human rights abuses, the clear message from the majority of the international community is that their belief that the net improvement for lifting this embargo will be monumental. Of course, the Cuban representative said that without the embargo, GDP would be in the region of 10% if these embargoes, these restrictions wouldn't be in place. Now, we heard from Jerry Magila, the South African ambassador to the United Nations, speaking on speaking yesterday, who came out incredibly strongly saying that the relationship and the backing that South Africa had, or that many South Africans had during the apartheid region era, will never be forgotten. He says that coming out and describing the immeasurable damage that the embargo has had on the Cuban people. We also heard from the representative of Zambia, who referenced the late Nelson Mandela, stating that it was his vision of humanity that really needs to be adhered to by the United States as well as the rest of the international community when it comes to compassion. The representative from Zambia said that the US has set an incredibly high global standard when it comes to their position in the international community. They need to live up to that high bar when it comes to giving the Cuban people every opportunity it comes to succeed. So incredibly strong positions from really the entire international community coming out and having this opportunity to speak at the United Nations. But of course, in the words of Nikki Haley, saying that there have been no winners here at the UN, only losers, because of course, although this resolution was overwhelmingly voted on in favour, this of course is the 27th year and we've still seen no action.
William Denzelo, thanks very much, our New York correspondent.